When you're left with squares and strips from a previous project, don't throw them away. They can be made into some really nice things. My name's Elizabeth and I like to sew smart, and sewing smart means using what you've got and not going out and buying anything new. So today I'm going to show you how you can make a really pretty little table runner with just squares and strips you've had left from other projects. So remember, we're working from our stash. I had, from a previous project, I had 5 of these 6.5-inch squares of this black fabric with the cherries on. Now I have left 3 of them whole and I've cross-cut 2 of them into triangles. This is also something I had left over, 2.5-inch strips. I've got some black and white striped and some white tone on tone, and you will need 3 pieces across your fabric cut 2 inches wide. These are going to be used for the whole squares and these are going to be used for the half triangles. I've got the binding, which again I have taken from my stash and cut, and it's just a black with a little white spot on, which fits in nicely with that. And now I'm going to show you how to do that. The first thing we're going to use is the whole squares, the 6.5-inch whole squares. This is what we want to make with these whole squares and this black and white stripe. The first thing you will need to do is cross cut your strips, 2-inch strips, and it will be 6.5 inches. The strip is going to go on one side there. Get hold of it. And the other side there on both of your squares. So you've got 2 lots, 6.5 inches, 6.5 inches. So what we will do, I'll put that one the same way round. We're going to pin and stitch it on opposite sides of your block. And then I'll come back and show you about measuring for the other side. So I've pinned and stitched a 1/4-inch seam along those 2 6.5-inch edges. Now these ones have to be slightly longer because they are going to go down either side. Now I've cut them longer than I actually need, but I will pin along there and on the opposite side. Make sure you get the right side of your fabric, right sides together, and I will pin that one along there, stitch down here, do the same with the next square, and then I will trim it back to make sure it's absolutely square when I've stitched down. I've stitched on the longer edges. I did these 6.5 inches and I did that, cut that at 10.5. I could have cut it a little bit less, but it has to square up now, so I'm using a 9.5-inch square ruler. Should fit nicely on there. We'll just check that we have that right. It's important that you keep them nice and square. So what I'm going to do is down this edge, across that edge, pull that off, turn it round, put the square back on. Sometimes you'll find that your stripes might not be exactly in line, but the point you've got to remember is when you buy a fabric, sometimes it isn't printed level. It's not necessarily your sewing. It can be that the stripe hasn't been printed on the fabric quite level. So that's one there. I'll repeat for this one. Okay, put your square on. You can do it on your board if you don't have a 9-inch ruler. You can use the lines on your board to cut. I just find it easier to have the 9-inch square. Turn it round. Line it up again. is pretty square. That's the top. You can see that that side is just a tiny bit short, a tiny bit over I should say. So I just put my ruler on again, and there it is. And if you notice, underneath your ruler, you'll see that the line will be square across there and down there. So I now have my 3 squares done, and they will go diagonally, they will be on point like that. So the next stage that we're going to do is we're going to make up the half triangles into a piece like that, and that is going to sit right in there, just in there. And the object is it goes line by line diagonally. You don't have to worry about how am I going to sew that piece into there. It's all going to be done in lines. So this is the remaining section. We've got to do 4 of these. So I've got a longer 2-inch strip of white tone on tone and a shorter one. Now the shorter one goes to the left of your triangle, so it will go there, and the longer one then will be stitched onto the top like so. So pin this one on here first. You will do it on all 4 sections. Pin that on, and I pin this way so that it doesn't catch and keeps, because it's a triangle. Remember, this piece is always a bit more stretchy than the square sides. So I pin that onto there. I'm going to stitch down there, and then I will pin that one on, right sides together, press it out, and then I'll come back and trim it off along the bottom. I've stitched all of the pieces on. Now you have to make sure this is nice and square, and we're going to trim off just down there. Line your ruler up if you can on your board, because you can see I'm at the 1/4 inch mark. That's at the tip. So I'm just going to cut this one off and this one off, and then I have my 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces ready to assemble with my squares. So here we now have our 4 half triangles and our 4 complete squares, and how it goes together is we will pin this to this. That will be 1 row. I will pin that and that. That will be a 2nd row, and then this will be pinned onto there, and that will be row 3, and then I will stitch each of those rows together. But we'll start with this as the first row, pin it, make sure it fits nice and cozy, pin it along here, just pop your pins in. It's a bit easier than when you did the smaller section, and stitch along there, pin this one to the top there, and we'll stitch along there, and then once that has been folded out, I will pin this one along here, taking that right out to the edge, pin that along there, and I will stitch that one, and the same with this one. And when I've stitched all 3 rows, I'll come back and then we'll pin the remainder together. All 3 lines have been stitched together. Now just a handy little hint here, when you come to pin these together, it pays if you have one seam going that way and the other one going the other way, so when you sew them together you don't get a lot of bulk because it makes a difference when you come to do your top quilting. So make sure that where your seams join, I mean that's okay, that's on a flat piece, that seam there is okay, but when you join two together and you want a nice point there and there, make sure one seam goes that way and one goes the other. Press them that way, then you won't have any difficulty when you come to quilt. So our next thing we're going to do is I'm going to turn over and pin these two seams together, and so pin those and stitch them and repeat for that one. I've joined my pieces together, stitched along that line and along that line, so I've given it a nice press. The points all meet very nicely. All that remains for me to do now is to cut a piece of lightweight batting and cut it a little bit bigger than this size, and the same with a piece of backing fabric, just a little bit larger. I'm going to stitch and quilt in the ditch on as many as I choose on here. You can do any type, of course, you can stipple or whatever you choose to do, and then I will trim it off all the way around, and then all that remains for me to do will be to put my binding on, and I've chosen, as I said, this piece I had in my stash. So that will end up looking very nice. If you do have a problem with your binding, if you look at Handy Hints number 1 and 2, it shows you pretty much everything you need to know there. And once that binding is on, then your quilt, your runner, is finished. I used just the same backing fabric as I had for the binding because I happen to have it. So the runner is now nice and complete. You can use anything you've got, but I think that's a really good thing to do with scraps. And should you want to do a different one, I've done another one here, which is in a black and white. And all I had, again, those were the strips I had left over, and these were the squares that I had from a previous project. And I just think that's a really nice way of using it up, but not wasting anything. So that's our project for today. I have one small correction I need to make, and I'm sure you all picked up on it. When you're trimming off your blocks, use a 9.5 inch square ruler and not a 9 as I called it. So that was my mistake, and I apologize. So if you've enjoyed this video, then I hope you have. Just give us a thumbs up and subscribe, because that's a great help. Go along to the Etsy shop and have a look at all the patterns there. This one is included. And I'll join you next time for another project. So go shopping in your stash. Don't buy anything new. Go and find what you've got in your stash, and I'm sure we'll find a way to use it. See you next time.